Welcome to FPWA. For those of you who don't know FPWA or are less familiar with FPWA, we're an anti-poverty policy and advocacy organization with 200 community-based member agencies and faith-based partners. And here at FPWA, like many of you, the well-being of New York's most vulnerable is our primary concern. And as we all know well, the well-being of New York City's most vulnerable is our mayor, Bill de Blasio's primary concern. And that's the reason we're here today. Mayor de Blasio, we're honored that you've come to FPWA. But more importantly, we're eager to hear what you have to say. Homelessness in New York City has been an escalating problem for decades, and everyone here knows that there's really no easy fix. For those of us, government and human service providers working daily hand in hand to help people achieve economic equity and upward mobility, we know that homelessness is not a problem that has a quick solution. There's no turnkey solution, but rather it's tied to, said differently, it's the consequence and the catalyst of many other challenges that New Yorkers face. What I want us to appreciate here is that the mayor has come to talk with us about what he seeks to do, what more he seeks to do. All of us who've been working on these issues, we appreciate the resolve that this administration has demonstrated over the course of the last 3 years to end this very challenging issue, at a minimum to reduce it. FPWA is a faith-based organization, and we believe strongly in the faith principle of caring for and loving our neighbors. And the homeless are our neighbors. And so it's in that spirit, that we've come here to receive the mayor's plan and to think about collectively how we all can work together to care for and love our neighbors and work to end or reduce homeless. I'm ambitious. We're going to reduce, but we're going to take it to an ending. And how we can help and support and lift up our neighbors. Fair? All right. And so I'm going to step away because you're really here to hear the mayor. But before we turn this event over to him, I have the pleasure of asking a friend, a mentor, Reverend A.R. Bernard, to come and say a few words. He's no stranger to many of us. He is a leader here in Brooklyn, New York. He pastors the Christian Cultural Center, but his leadership extends well beyond Brooklyn, well beyond this city, this nation, to places all over this globe. And the work that he has done has impacted countless numbers of people, including myself. So, Reverend Bernard, please come. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank all of you for being here today. You know, as the mayor reached out and we talked about his executive summary and the things that he has planned, and he asked if I would attend and be a part of this, there was no hesitation. I just wanted to know what role I could play, because I'm aware that on any given night in America, over 500,000 homeless people are sleeping on the streets, maybe in cars, maybe in homeless shelters, in subsidized transitional housing, but they are not in a place that they can call home. California, Texas, New York, Florida, Massachusetts, these states account for more than 50% of the homeless population in the United States. The problem is urban, it is suburban, it is rural. And what strikes me most is the fact that 50% of homeless adult individuals were homeless as a child. And that means the problem is generational. And when something is generational, it means that we better get out in front of it before we totally lose control. I applaud the mayor for taking on the challenge. It's going to require ingenuity, determination. It's going to require time because it cannot be fixed overnight. But we have to be intentional. We have to be bold. We have to be audacious in taking on the challenge to make a difference. And what I like about what the mayor's approach is, it's communal. And what that means is already to be homeless is dehumanizing. So when you are extracted from your community and sent to another part of the city or state to live in a place that's foreign to you, and most often, too often, in a community that doesn't want you there, it furthers that dehumanizing experience. So making it communal and keeping people within their communities and helping them there, I think that is a very important part of what the mayor plans to do. Quick anecdote, had lunch with someone who's part of the housing program. We were talking about what they experienced with a project that we were working with Common Ground. And they provided key cards like they do in the hotels, which is more cost efficient for individuals to get in and out of their housing facility. And one particular homeless person came home and the key card didn't work. And they simply took the card, threw it away, and disappeared. It took 2 months to locate this person. And when they were asked, why didn't they ask for help? They said, because I just thought that someone more important than me had access to what was mine. So there is this temporariness in their thinking. There is this sense of less value that they've adapted to and adjusted to, that they no longer fight, but simply go with whatever they're handed. That's a bad place to be in. So without any further comments, it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce our own Mayor of New York City, the Honorable Bill de Blasio.
Pastor, thank you so much. I want to really thank you for putting this into powerful perspective. And before I acknowledge some of the dignitaries in the room, I want to thank everyone here. People in this room have devoted your lives to helping people in need. And you know it's been a long fight. And you know it will continue to be a long fight. But I don't see anyone shirking from the fight. I see this as a lifetime commitment. And we're blessed in this city that we could fill a room with so many people who feel that. And there are thousands more like you. So as I describe this vision, I want to affirm from the beginning, the vision can work, the vision will work, because there's an army of people who already believe in uplifting others and have proven it can happen. Even in the most complex, most diverse city in the world, we can lift up each other. I also want to tell you I had a real pleasure before we started today. 6 wonderful individuals that I got to spend some time with. And some of them are here now. All of them were people who were purposeful, energetic, enthusiastic, focused on bettering themselves and their families, had been working hard, ready to work hard, many working right now, others pursuing work or education. Exemplary people. Did I mention they were homeless? And that's part of what today is all about, recognizing that people who are New Yorkers, who are neighbors, often also grapple with homelessness. That makes them no less New Yorkers, no less our neighbors, no less our fellow human beings. So I want to say to Freddie and Lucy and Eric and Pedro and Ruth and Oscar, it was my profound pleasure to know you, and I admire the good route and the good path you're on, and we're here to support you. To our wonderful host, Jennifer Jones-Austin, who has been my partner in so much work, co-chair of my transition, did extraordinary work helping us build the administration, doing extraordinary work here at the Federation. And wherever you go, not just in New York City, but around the country, you can hear her powerful voice. Let's thank her and all the wonderful people of the Federation. And Pastor Bernard, I learned a long time ago, one of the go-to people to turn to in this city if you want guidance. By the way, that can be spiritual guidance, that can be human guidance, that could be guidance about how to best serve people, because he knows about all those things. But Pastor, I really appreciate your remarks, because I know you've spent a lifetime ministering to people in need. And you also have, I may note, the biggest congregation in New York City, filled with every kind of people, including people who fought hard to make it against a lot of adversity. So you speak from a profound sense of the human condition and the reality of this city. But I've seen time and time again the good works, not just the good words, the good works you have achieved, and it's my honor to be your partner in this work. Let's thank Pastor Bernard. Many dignitaries, my great uncle was a priest, so he would not forgive me, may he rest in peace, if I did not acknowledge from the Archdiocese of New York and from Catholic Charities, Monsignor Kevin Sullivan, special thank you to you. And from our administration, and they have worked so hard. This is the vision we're laying out today. And in fact, right now I'm going to hold up the glossy version. And people worked long and hard on this, so it's bedtime reading, everybody. Okay, I need you to take a look at it. But this title was chosen purposely. This is a commitment to turning the tide. This is a commitment to doing something different. Now, the folks who worked on this, our Deputy Mayor, Dr. Erminia Blasio, our Commissioner Steve Banks for Social Services, our OMB Director Dean Foulahan, our Intergovernmental Director Emma Wolf, and many, many others in their teams. This was a challenging labor, because this is a tough topic that has defied solution for decades. But this was an honest effort to come to grips with the problem, and to speak some truths that had to be spoken, and to lay out a path we believe we can sustain. Let's thank all of them for the work they do. Want to thank from labor, and they've also been important allies in our efforts to uplift people and to get them good opportunities to get trained and to work. The president of the New York City Central Labor Council, Vinny Alvarez, thank you. And finally, elected officials who are here with us, we've worked so closely with. Want to thank Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, Councilmember Margaret Chin, Councilmember Helen Rosenthal, and Councilmember Brad Lander. Thank you all. So let me start with some more of the human reality. We all feel the problem of homelessness. It's one of the most intense, visceral human realities that we experience in this city. It is not easy ever to see someone homeless. It's not easy for that homeless person to be homeless, first and foremost. When you see someone whose life unfortunately led them to a situation where they no longer had a home, you feel pain. You feel pain for them. You feel pain for their family. You feel something's wrong. I do every time, every single time. Something's wrong, something's broken, something has to be fixed. That's what goes through your heart and your soul. And if you're like me, you feel angry too, because it shouldn't be this way. And we don't know everyone's life. We don't know what happened. We don't know where things took the wrong turn. We know more and more it is about the cost of living and how hard it is to make ends meet. But we don't know each individual story. We just know something's wrong. So it's that strange combination of sorrow and anger I feel every time. I think New Yorkers all over the 5 boroughs feel it. It's something that is not abstract. It's not something you read about and can't relate to. We can all relate to it in one form or another. Few of us can understand fully what it would mean to actually be homeless. And it's hard to imagine people who've worked hard and lived by the rules and still end up homeless, but that's happening every day in this city, and as Pastor said, all over the country. There are wonderful, accomplished people. There are some household names even who spent part of their life or part of their childhood in homelessness. So we have to understand it humanly. We have to understand why it grabs at us so much. And we have to understand, and everyone in this room does, it's a status quo we don't accept. Doesn't mean we think it's easy to address, but we don't accept it. If we ever accepted the notion of pervasive homelessness, we'd be losing some of our own humanity. And we're not going to let that happen. Now, I'm going to say some things today that are painful to hear. And I'm going to say some things that are not politically convenient, because we have to lay it out very plainly. But here's a fact that suggests something we got to grapple with very deeply. We are the greatest city in the world. That is a fact, too. We're a compassionate city in so many ways. But the number of people in shelter has trended upward for 35 years. That is a fact that we don't look in the face enough. And that has to stop. Somehow we've been moving in the wrong direction for 3.5 decades. My obligation is to provide a strategy. A lot of people said they needed, and rightfully so, they needed to hear a clear articulation of a vision. There were a lot of pieces that we put into the equation, a lot of tools we used, a lot of initiatives we undertook, but we needed something bigger and stronger and better, and that's what this plan is meant to be. But you read this plan, you'll understand we do not accept the status quo. We intend to change the status quo. Now, that is not a statement, a grandiose statement. I want to be very clear. I'm going to lay out the actual numbers and the facts and the vision, and it doesn't take us to nirvana by any stretch of the imagination. This is a blood and guts war strategy, because we'll be fighting this war for a long time. But I do believe we can do better. I do believe we can disrupt the status quo, and I know the city has the ability to reach more people and to reach them in a fairer and better way. I'm going to say it here and every chance I get thereafter. It will be a long, long battle. It will be a tough battle. There's, sometimes in the history, people will be talking about going off to war, real war, military war, and there'd be that phrase, it'll be nothing, the boys will be home by Christmas. This is the opposite, I'm telling you here today. We'll be at this a long time. Because if I told you anything more pleasant, it wouldn't be the truth. We will make progress, but it will be incremental. It will be slow, and I hope and I believe it will be steady. The more we work together, the better it will go. The more we make it a mission for everyone in the city, for faith leaders, for community organizations, for neighborhood residents, for elected officials, for businesses, for labor. The more we make it everyone's business, the better we'll do, the faster we'll go. But any way you slice it, it will be about incremental progress. But if we sustain incremental progress, it will be the first time that's happened in 3.5 decades. And that will open the door to something better up ahead. It's a deep-rooted problem. It is not a problem, even though I appreciate very deeply what Jennifer said. I, today, cannot see an end. I can see improvement and constant progress if we all do things right. But again, I'm not going to lie to the people in New York City and say I have a defined end in sight. I know how we get better. I know if we continually do this work, we might find solutions that are even deeper. We might find an even better pathway. But right now, I want to break the cycle. I want to break the pattern of the last 3.5 decades of us going in the wrong direction. And it's taken us 3 years to realize some of these hard truths. I want to be very clear about that. There was a lot of trial and error. There's some things we did that worked. There are some things we did that didn't work. There's some things that are beginning to work now. But it's clear how much it's going to take to turn the tide. Why? The why is what we have to focus on more than ever. Because a lot of people in this room were deeply involved when homelessness in the form we know today really became a prevalent issue in the city in the early 1980s. And I think it's fair to say for a lot of you who were involved early, it was oftentimes an issue related to single individuals, particularly single men, oftentimes folks who had had substance abuse problems, mental health issues, incarceration issues. Didn't mean there weren't families involved, didn't mean there weren't working people. But not what we came to learn since the Great Recession. Since the Great Recession, this has become a different and deeper problem because it's more and more an economic problem. Working people becoming homeless, families in record numbers ending up in shelter, people who don't have any mental health challenge or substance abuse challenge, never been incarcerated, still ending up in shelter. That's what we're seeing more and more. That's a more fundamental structural problem. The numbers speak so clearly. Right now, 70% of the folks in shelter are family members. Families in shelter make up 70% of our shelter population. Very different than what we knew in the past. As I mentioned, working people, 34% of those families have a member of the family working right now. In addition to those who are working recently or those who are in training or education programs, 34% have a family member working right now. What this city has experienced is incessantly higher and higher cost of housing without anywhere near the same increase in the level of wages and compensation. That's what's been going on for years and years. We went through the Great Recession like every place else in the country. But unlike every place else in the country, the cost of housing kept going up through it, during it, after it, and left people in the lurch. And so a lot of folks are experiencing the phenomenon in their lives. They're seeing homeless people they don't even know are homeless. We respond to what we see on the street. A lot of times you'll be in the store, you'll be in the grocery store in line, you'll be at work, you'll be on the subway, and the person next to you is homeless and you don't even know it. Because they're on their way to work, because they're taking their kid to school, because they're dealing with this reality, but they don't wear a badge that says, I'm homeless. Likewise, when you see someone on the street, sometimes we see someone on the street that is homeless 24 hours a day living on the street, the most unacceptable of all the realities. Sometimes you see someone who's hanging out in the corner and then goes home to a shelter at night. Sometimes you see someone who's panhandling, but actually has a place to live. And it's not possible to know which person is homeless, which person is not, or how they are. This has become so much more complicated a reality. What we do know, and this is something that has begun to work, is that if you agree the most pernicious of all the realities is someone who is street homeless 24 hours a day permanently. Job one is to help people off the streets and get them to a better life. Here's where we found a ray of light over the last year. The Homestat Initiative, which has attempted to do something that was not done previously. Literally go out and meet each individual who is living permanently on the streets. Get to know them deeply, understand everything that can be understood about them and their situation, how they got to the street, what that pathway to the street was, what's the best pathway back from the street to a better life. That's what the Homestat program is about. And I remember Commissioner Banks said to me in the beginning, let's be clear, it's not like the first time a Homestat worker goes up to someone who's been on the street for a while, they're going to come right in. I said, okay, Steve, how many times do you think it's going to take? He said, well, it could be 10 times. It could be 20 times. It could be 100 times. But as the dialogue deepens, as the familiarity grows, as the homeless individual comes to trust that worker, keeps coming back, knows them by name, knows their history, knows what went wrong and what they need to get right, our chances will increase. It's been about a year. As of today, 690 people have come off the street and stayed off the street. That is the beginning of bigger progress on, again, the single worst element of the homelessness crisis. We're going to have to do it a long time. We're going to have to prove that it works and that people who come off stay off, but this is offering us some real hope. But listen to the crucial ingredient there is treating the individual as an individual. When the worker comes up to the homeless individual and knows them by name and knows their history and knows about their family and knows about their life before, maybe they served in the military, maybe they worked in a store, maybe they grew up in a neighborhood that they talk about, when that humanity comes out, that's when you start to make a deeper connection and can do something different. That's been why people are coming in, because they start to trust. And because of the safe havens we created that give them a safe, intimate space they feel comfortable going into. But what did we do over those decades? We didn't do that. We treated people like a problem, not like an individual. So there wasn't that human touch. There wasn't that knowledge. I'm not saying people in this room in all of your work didn't manage to create real bonds with people in need. I know you did. I'm talking about the whole approach, the whole strategy. The strategy wasn't human enough. It didn't focus on developing, everywhere we went, that human connection. And we would take an individual or a family and send them to shelter anywhere with no reference to where they came from or what their lives are about. Pastor said it. Imagine if you're from Brooklyn and you're told you're going all the way to the Bronx and that's where you're going to be. You know nothing about that neighborhood. You've never been there. You don't know anyone. You just know that you don't feel particularly welcome. As opposed to if your own neighborhood was supporting you as you got back on your feet. We would put people in shelters, we'd put them in hotels, we'd put them in cluster apartments, whatever happened to be available, because the system was created in crisis in the 1980s and never got out of crisis. And I'm not saying we didn't experience that same reality in these last 3 years. I claim full responsibility for everything we did that worked and everything we did that didn't work. We too felt we were always playing from behind. The crisis always seemed to be bearing down on us. The numbers always seemed to be growing. And when you're just trying to get a roof over people's heads, you take the first roof that's available. But that isn't enough. A roof over someone's head is not part of solving their problem and getting them back on their feet and getting them out of shelter. You need something more. We didn't think about people as members of a family, as members of a community, as members of a house of worship. We didn't think about the whole person. And this is something my wife Charlene talks about a lot, that people have a support network. A lot of time it's their immediate family or their extended family, but it can be all sorts of other supports. Their house of worship, a community group they're part of, friends in the neighborhood. People tend to have a group of people that have their back. If you take someone who's already in crisis as far away as we typically have from their support network, it's not going to help them make their life better. So now we're going to change the focus. We're going to focus on the local. We're going to focus on the human. We're going to think about people and their pathway to something better. We're going to reach out to every part of our society, but we're going to start with families. We're going to start with families. Because family members, first and foremost, want to see something good for their own. Doesn't mean every family is unified. Doesn't mean there aren't problems. Doesn't mean other members of families don't have their own struggles. But typically, in families all over the city, there's a sense of solidarity. And if they can help, they want to help. But guess what? Government hasn't set up to connect with families. Government has not thought about how can family members be part of the solution, how can they be allies and partners, how can we help the family at the same time as we're helping the homeless individual. Communities have ended up feeling, and I understand why, that a shelter or any other facility is a problem because they haven't, of course, gotten to know the people being served. They don't feel a connection to them. They don't feel it could be they themselves in that same situation. If everyone in New York City thought that could be me, there but for the grace of God go I, we'd be having a different discussion. But one thing that the government has done that's made it harder is we've sent people all over. And there's not a sense of the people who are being served are from my very own community. They are just like me. And that's something we aim to change. We think that will create a better and fairer system. We think that will create more human solidarity. We think it will create more chance for success in helping people back on their feet. So we're going to deepen our response to homelessness. And now we're going to respond to homelessness borough by borough, neighborhood by neighborhood, family by family, person by person. En español, le haremos frente a la crisis de personas sin hogar, condado por condado, barrio por barrio, familia por familia, persona por persona. What does this mean in terms of the big picture? It means we plan on reducing the number of people in shelter, again, incrementally, steadily. But this is the honest number we believe we can commit to. We will reduce the number of people in shelter by 2,500 people by the end of 2021. Is it a gloriful goal? Is it everything we want it to be? No. It's the honest goal. We want to surpass it, and with your help, we aim to surpass it. But this is what we can tell the people of New York City can be done and can be sustained. A borough by borough, neighborhood by neighborhood approach that will ensure that people are in shelter to begin with in the borough they come from and ultimately as close to the neighborhood they come from as possible. That will be the governing philosophy of the homeless shelter system. To change the relationship with communities, with neighborhoods, we owe communities more communication, better notification, more accountability, more community input, and I'll describe how we will provide those things. And I want to be clear again, that doesn't mean there's going to be peace and love all the time. We're going to have an honest conversation with communities, and we're going to do what we need to do to give people a roof over their head and keep moving people to a better situation. But we also can listen better to communities. We can notify better. We can work with communities to find better approaches, even if there's always going to be some resistance to a facility in a neighborhood. What we intend to do is to reduce radically the overall number of facilities in this city. Now, that's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take creating different facilities to replace them. So this is not, again, a fun and easy pathway. But the overall impact, I believe, is profound. We will reduce the number of shelter facilities by 45% in this city. And that is going to be achieved by getting out of all cluster apartments by 2021. And that is a new and revised timeline, which I will describe, and I'm going to describe why. But it's the one we believe we can meet. We will end the use of cluster apartments by 2021. We will end the use of commercial hotels by 2023. Are these, again, the most satisfying goals? No. They're the ones we believe are real. And as I said, we changed that timeline on clusters by 3 full years. Why? Because we have to create facilities in neighborhoods all over the city that adjust to where people come from. And that's going to take a lot of work unto itself. And we can't close off that which we have now until we have enough capacity that actually aligns to reality. Every community in this city has homeless people. We need a shelter system that reflects where people come from and allows people to be sheltered in their own community. That's going to take an entire reworking. So this reality is the blunt truth of what it's going to take to get there and why we need the time to make the pieces come together. I want to be clear, we also looked hard at the original goal of the end of 2018 for ending the clusters and came to the realization it would lead to intensive new reliance on hotels. Our goal is to not go that path. Our goal is, of course, to never open a new cluster, only to close them steadily. And our goal is to ideally never need to go into a new hotel or only sparingly need to. But had we kept to the original goal on clusters, it would have unfortunately led to an even greater reliance on hotels. I said earlier it would not be a politically popular plan. I think you can see why. But I refer to the fact that we, as a city, all of us, every kind of administration, Democratic, Republican, Independent, we made some of the same mistakes over and over for decades because it never was a borough-based and neighborhood-based shelter system. 3.5 decades, and the problem only got worse. Remember one of the great thinkers of all time, Albert Einstein? Said, what was the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result? We're not going to do the same thing over and over anymore. It's time for something different. And I told you, even after you adjusted for inflation, average real household income as a result of the Great Recession declined 6.3%. So there are the economists weighing in. It's not that even people's income stayed flat. In real terms, they declined in those years, and the cost of housing kept going up. And a lot of people got caught in that vice. And right in the middle of that, in 2011, one of the most successful anti-homelessness initiatives that this city had ever undertaken was canceled. The Advantage program, canceled by the city, canceled by the state, at a time when we needed it most in the years after Great Recession. And you can see the intensive increase in the number of people in shelter. In the several years after Advantage was canceled, shelter population went up almost 15,000 people. Here are the facts, just to give you the historical perspective, because it's striking. I just want to give it to you in historical perspective of the first month of each of the last 3 administrations, so you see just how off base the long-term strategy has been. First month of the Giuliani administration, 24,000 people in shelter. The first month of the Bloomberg administration, 31,000 people in shelter. The first month of my administration, 51,500 people in shelter. Over double the number of people in shelter in that time frame. I said, honestly, since we came in, we've had to struggle to deal with a constant flow of people coming in. And that got to our worst point just about the time of Thanksgiving last year. We reached the peak population that's ever been in shelter, 60,709. Today, we have just over 60,000 people in shelter. By the end of 2021, we will get to 57,500. Then our job is to go further and keep sustaining the decline. And again, that's all of our work. We know that it will be tough, but we also know that some things have begun to work. I mentioned Homestat, but I know if the equation was about incomes that had stayed flat or even gone down and the cost of housing that had constantly gone up, one of the number one things we had to do was change the affordability equation. We're doing that with the Affordable Housing Plan. We're doing that by even shifting within the Affordable Housing Plan more units to folks at lower incomes, to seniors, to veterans. We're doing that with our commitment to 15,000 new supportive apartments, of which 550 will be available this year. These are core pieces of making the change, plus the focus I talked about during the State of the City of increasing the number of jobs and increasing the number of good-paying jobs. The affordability crisis obviously underlies so much of the homelessness crisis. We feel that we have at least some of the tools to address that part of the problem. We know keeping people in their apartments so they don't slip out of their apartments and into homelessness is crucial. Our prevention efforts, including rental assistance, have reached 161,000 households over 3 years. Some of those folks were going to end up in shelter. Some weren't, but at least we stabilized our circumstance. We know access to counsel, being able to avoid eviction because you have a lawyer, is a crucial part of the equation. We increased by tenfold the amount of resources going to support New Yorkers faced with eviction, harassment, mistreatment by unscrupulous landlords. That investment led to a 24% decrease in evictions. We have now doubled down with a new plan working with the City Council. I want to give the City Council great credit for their focus and their strong advocacy. Universal access to counsel will be in the executive budget. And that's going to be a game changer for even more New Yorkers. When that initiative reaches its peak in 2022, 400,000 people will be served a year. So it's going to entirely remake the dynamic of how people facing eviction and displacement are supported, and it's going to help us keep people in their homes and preserve that affordable housing at the same time. I mentioned Homestat, and we know that that person-to-person, highly intensive approach is working. We have to go a lot farther. We have to prove it can work for the long haul. We've been working very hard to improve shelters because we know some homeless folks don't go to a shelter who are somewhere on the street because they fear the conditions in the shelter. We have greatly intensified the number of inspections. We have greatly reduced the number of housing violations, a drop of 83% since January 2016. And I think most powerfully, and I want to thank Commissioner O'Neill for this, the NYPD has wholeheartedly taken on the role and the responsibility for supervising all security in our city shelters, and that's a game changer. And neighborhood policing, separately, now involves a commitment by our neighborhood coordinating officers who work in the communities and the streets around a shelter to also constantly work on conditions outside of shelters and to address anything that would be disruptive or feel disruptive to neighborhoods. Finally, I mentioned our focus on clusters. We have now gotten out of 44 cluster buildings altogether, and we're not going back. Those will no longer be part of how we address homelessness. In the course of this year, we will be out of 40 more cluster buildings, and we will continue that effort over these next 5 years until we are no longer in any cluster buildings. Now, this title, Turning the Tide, again, it was chosen purposefully. It is not a triumphalist title. It's not a dire title either. It's turning the tide. It means we're turning the situation steadily together. Part of that is coming to a new understanding with neighborhoods. And I mentioned that we haven't communicated well enough. We haven't maximized the opportunity to have a sense of partnership because people felt alienated. But we're going to be resolute that we have to help those in need, get them to a better place. If we're going to reduce the number of people on the street and the number of people in shelter, we have to get this right. By the way, as I mentioned in the beginning, people really are distressed, and rightfully so, when they see someone on the street. Every time Homestat succeeds in getting someone off the street, they go to a shelter. So victory in the first instance can be getting someone to a shelter and off the street. But that means there's another person in a shelter bed. And then we have to get that person to something permanent and better. We have to help communities to feel they're part of that equation. We have to ask communities where, if we're going to have a shelter that will serve your own neighbors, people from here, where can we best place it? What would be the best location from the community point of view? How can we work together to make it work from the beginning? So the big picture, I mentioned some of the numerical goals, and the key thing is if we're going to go to a borough by borough, neighborhood by neighborhood approach, at the same time as we reduce the overall number of facilities radically, again, it will take a lot of moving parts to get us there. But in the end, when we complete our goal of getting out of clusters and getting out of hotels, we will have closed 360 shelter sites. So communities will see something tangible. They'll see things closing that they haven't wanted in their community. To get there, and again, here's the rub, here's the blunt truth. 90 new shelters will be necessary. We think it's more than a fair trade-off to create new and better facilities, cleaner, safer facilities. The overall number of buildings that are addressing the homelessness crisis will be reduced by 45%. Right now, 647 buildings are part of the shelter system. We will ultimately be at 364 citywide. We're also going to go into the existing shelters that have been broken and refurbish them, and we're going to do a comprehensive effort around the city to bring all shelters to a better standard of quality. That will help us then say to residents, we want you to stay in the shelter facility to the maximum extent possible during the days for education and training initiatives. Right now, too many shelters don't have a place for someone during the day, or it's not a proper place. We want people to stay and get help getting on with their future. And that's also more fair to the community. One example that you will see immediately in April. In Crown Heights, Brooklyn, a new building is being prepared as the first of the 90 new shelters. 132 families will be in this facility in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. But there's a lot of experts in this room. A lot of people have watched this for decades. When you visit the facility in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, you're going to see something you never saw before. 132 families, overwhelmingly from Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Literally, the preference will be for people who come from that immediate neighborhood and immediately surrounding neighborhoods. In our shelter system right now are 120 families from Crown Heights. But some are in Brooklyn, some are in Queens, some are in Manhattan, some are in the Bronx. They're all being brought home to their home community in Crown Heights. So I've talked to you about what we're going to do. Now we need to talk about some help we need from our neighbors to the north in Albany. And we need everyone in this room to help us do it. We've seen a great proposal put forward recently by Assemblyman Andy Hevesy, the Home Stability Support Plan. It's rental assistance for more people to stay in their homes and stay out of shelter. It will reach many more people than our current resources allow, and it makes Albany co-equal in joining us being accountable for this problem. We need Albany at the table. We're 43% of the state's population. We need Albany to be a part of the solution, and they can be with Assemblyman Hevesy's bill. We also know the state did something very good by committing to a large number of supportive housing apartments. And we're very appreciative, but now we need to see a plan that will actually deliver these apartments. And here's a chance to do it with the upcoming budget in Albany. We want to see a plan for opening units this year, next year, and the years after, so we can speed people on the way to a better life. That's what Albany needs to do to help us. We're doing our fair share. You're going to see it in this plan. We're putting a lot of resources in to get it right, to make the big change, to break the cycle of the past. Albany needs to be our partner. And I mentioned families. And I think this is another one of the missing links because I, again, don't believe families were treated coherently, humanly, or strategically as partners. There wasn't a plan for actually reaching out to family members and saying, let's work together to solve a problem of a member of your family who's homeless, who increasingly is someone who just came upon hard times economically and needs help. We have to empower families to be a part of the solution. We have to talk to them, first of all. We have to try and find common ground. We have to ask them what will help them help their family member. And we have to be ready to provide support. We have to be ready to put our money where our mouth is if we're going to solve the problem with the help of families. That's what the Pathway Home approach is all about. We started, as some of you know, back during the holidays. We saw some real interest. We need to deepen it. It's a simple concept. A family is willing to take in a member is homeless, or even a whole family related to them as homeless. We're going to go the extra mile to support that family. We're going to help them with their rent. We're going to help them make ends meet. We're going to make it a good equation for that family. And it makes so much sense, because especially if we're talking about children, Lord knows we'd rather have children in a family setting than in a shelter. We'd rather have family members with their loved ones, feeling warmth and support as they get back on their feet. Why shouldn't we provide financial support to make that happen? Makes all the sense in the world. By the way, if there's any taxpayers in the room, it's a hell of a lot less expensive than a family being in shelter. So it's humane. It's much more intelligent strategically in terms of actually helping someone get their life better, and it costs a lot less too. That's the family part of the equation. I've mentioned the community part of the equation. We're going to have a different kind of conversation. It won't always be an easy conversation, but we're going to have a different kind of conversation with community boards, with community civic organizations. And I want to be clear. We've looked at the exact numbers. Every community board in New York City has people in our shelter system who come from it. Some have a very small number. Some have a very large number. We're going to change our shelter system to reflect the needs of each community board. We're going to ask each community board to do their fair share. For some, it may mean a very small facility. If a community board has 50 people in the shelter system, we want them to have some kind of capacity like that. If they have thousands, we want them to have capacity for the people from their neighborhood, even if it means enough capacity for thousands of people. We want people to be close to home, but we want everyone to do their fair share. Every community board needs to be part of the solution. And we will, whenever we site a shelter, we will set up a community advisory board, and the idea will be to work in common for a better outcome. We know a lot of people are going to say, wait, we don't want anything like that in our neighborhood. Well, guess what? Everyone needs to take on their fair share, but we can make it work better if we work together. We can figure out what will make it succeed and what will make it not a negative for the community, but sometimes even a positive for the community, especially because people will know the folks inside those doors come from right around their own streets, their own neighborhood, their own block. When we create a new shelter facility, we will provide 30 days notice or more. That is going to be a strict rule. We've actually already been applying that rule in recent months. That will be a consistent rule, and we understand why that's been a point of contention. Communities deserve to know they will get notification. That does not mean if there's protests, we will change our mind. It means we want people to come to the table with us, offer their concerns. If they have an alternative location, we'll look at that too. If they have better ways we can do the work, we're listening. But they deserve notification. Now, there's also the question of hotels. And I mentioned we have a plan to get out of hotels altogether. But we came to the conclusion that if we were going to do that, we had to juxtapose it against our plan to get out of clusters. Getting out of clusters is a higher priority. So getting out of clusters will require us to use hotels longer, and sometimes it may require us to even go into new hotels. That's not our goal. If we could never go into another new hotel, that would be ideal. But we're going to be honest with people that sometimes it may be necessary. Sometimes the number of homeless folks might spike up, particularly in certain weather or certain times of year. Sometimes as we're closing clusters, there'll be additional pressure on the system. Sometimes if Homestat's working really well, more and more people will be coming in off the streets. Goal is to not go into a single new hotel, but sometimes we may have to. In those instances, those will be game time decisions, because that's the last resort. A lot of times that's literally a decision that has to be made that same day. We're going to provide in real time notification to community leaders. The minute we decide to go into a new hotel, we will give them an immediate alert. But I'm also being very honest with people. That will typically be the same day we go in, because that's how the decisions will have to be made. And we're always going to ask community people to help us think together. Anytime we identify a site, if community leaders say, we have a better site for you in this community board, I'd like them to prove themselves right and prove us wrong. I'd like them to show us that better site, and if it'll work, we'll be happy to use it. But I want people to start from a constructive place of figuring out how we get something done, again, knowing you'll be serving members of your own community, your own neighborhood. Okay, I've laid it out to you. You have your bedtime reading. I'll finish with this. If you are homeless, you yourself, an individual, or with a family, it becomes a very lonely existence. Because again, today you're cut off from everything you knew. You're shunted about. You don't know where it's going to end. You don't know the people you're dealing with most days. You feel alone, and not for bad reason. That sense of loneliness isn't going to help us turn people's lives around. Think about it. Again, not because people weren't trying their best. Oftentimes, because it was crisis after crisis after crisis, we created a system that actually didn't help people feel good about themselves or feel hope that they could get to a better place. I mentioned the wonderful folks I met with earlier. They struggled against those realities. They found good people like those in this room who lifted them up. They found a way. It wasn't easy. And there's a whole lot of other people who were left discouraged, like Pastor said. That story Pastor offered in the beginning was incredibly painful. The key card didn't work, and the guy felt he didn't belong anymore. Well, there's a lot of people feel they don't belong. That means, as people are kept disconnected from where they came from their family, from their house of worship, from their whole support network, we are actually adding a barrier to the process. Taking a bad situation and inadvertently making it worse. Which is why we need a radical change of approach, and a difficult one, but one that will take us to a place where a person feels they're a human being who's being treated like a human being who's on their way back to a better situation. And we learned that the hard way, because we didn't get it either in this administration too often. We didn't see that we needed a much more radical change. Now we get that we have to emphasize the role of family. We have to emphasize the role of neighborhood. We get that we have to reach out to our faith leaders and faith communities in a much deeper way, to community organizations in a much deeper way. A lot of times they will show us the answer that isn't evident to government. But we know they hold some of the keys to the solution. And we know for years, a lot of community organizations and houses of worship have been trying to get government's attention, trying to get their support. We're going to deepen those efforts because we know it's part of the long-term change. We know this is something that literally could happen to almost anyone. Homelessness is something that has happened to people you would not believe could fall into homelessness. And we've got to have that in our hearts when we think about this problem. That doesn't negate any of the challenges I've talked about. It doesn't say that we should not push this government to do better, but we need to humanly remember how one paycheck away so many people are, one bad break away. I want to just end with something that's a story I found very affecting. And it was actually written, it was a column written by Cardinal Dolan, who, as Pastor knows, like Pastor Bernard, one of the great faith leaders of this city, and he has spoken about homelessness not just from the perspective of his faith or his ministry or from the perspective of Catholic Charities. He wrote, I thought, a downright confessional column in which he talked about his own pathway, trying to understand the issue, his own coming to the realization that he had to understand better people who had suffered. This was back in 2015, and I want to just read you 2 vignettes from it. He said, "Not long ago, a young homeless married couple stopped me after Mass in the cathedral. Yes, I'm afraid they fit the stereotype. Unclean, smelly, agitated, and irrational. They were in distress, yet reluctant to accept the remedies I tried to offer. I did what I could, but was still bothered when they left again for the streets. A week or so later, I got a frantic letter from the out-of-town parents of the young man, and in one of his rare phone calls to them, he had apparently told them he had visited me. The folks let me know of their relief that they had been living in agony for months, wondering where their son was. A son who had had a sad history of emotional problems. They wondered if he was even still alive. And they begged me to persuade him to come home. That young homeless couple was someone's son and daughter." And then he says further, "I confess at times that I'm at my wit's end wondering how to help. Not only all the homeless here in town, but the individual ones who bother me or cause me to turn my head away from them on my walk to work. So it's good that the plight of those without food and shelter has become a conversation around our own kitchen tables. How we help them can give rise to good debates. That we should reach out should not be debatable. So we will reach out. We will not abandon people. We will not abandon each other. This is a big city, a tough city, but a city with a big heart, a city of compassion, a city of strong families and strong neighborhoods and strong values. And it's a city of people who look out for each other. And that is admired all over the world. Now we all have a job to do. Thank you. God bless you all.